Welcome to the Believe Again podcast. I'm your host, Josh Robry, and I'm very excited about today's episode with Pastor Marc Poland. Marc is a friend of mine. I work with him at ARC, and he has a unique story of planting a church and then having to shut it down 2 weeks later. So we're going to talk about that journey that he took on this podcast, as well as a lot of other things. I'm surprised we got to as much as we did in just 30 minutes. I mean, we talk about him planting as a person of color, the unique journey that's been for him. We also talk about COVID, who hasn't been touched by that, and all the different things happening in our country in 2020, as well as the personal toll that pastoring and leading can sometimes take on our families. And he shares his journey with his family and what he's learned along the way. So I know you're really going to enjoy this episode. So sit back, put on your seatbelt, and get ready. It's going to be an awesome ride. All right, everybody, welcome to the Believe Again podcast. I'm your host, Josh Robry, and today I'm very, very excited to talk with my good friend and church planner, coach, family man, just all around great guy, even though he's a Philadelphia sports fan, Marc Poland.
We are suffering right now. But thank you. Glad to be here, my friend.
Yes.
Anything for you.
I hope this episode is more of a Joel Embiid episode and not a Ben Simmons episode. Anyway, did I say his last name right?
No, but it's okay.
How do you say it?
It's Joel Embiid.
Joel Embiid.
Yes.
Anyway.
Process.
So the process. Okay, so here we go. We're going to jump in here, and I'm really excited to talk with Marc. He's a church planner, pastor, and he works with ARC as well, works for ARC and works with me and helps me coach church planners, and we get to team up and do that together. It's a great privilege. But honestly, I just really have enjoyed you becoming my friend more than anything. I mean, I just cannot believe how much I like you. You're just such an amazing guy. And I joke around with Mark Cleary all the time. I'm like, man, what's wrong with Poland? Because no one can find anything wrong with them. So I'm just afraid of what it's going to be one day. But here we are. You know, we've known each other for a couple of years now, and you still just continue to serve people. You have a servant's heart, smile, joyful, always positive. And, I thought it'd be good for our audience to hear from you today.
Yeah, like I said, I'm excited. And likewise, man, I think you're incredible. I enjoy being around you. I think you're just brilliant. And listen, man, it's just all about having some fun, when we're together. So again, I'm just really excited to be here. And if ever you want to know what's wrong with me, just ask me. I'll tell you. I got a whole lot. If you ask Monica, if you ask my wife,
normally you can ask somebody's wife. They got the list.
She's got a whole list.
How long do you have?
Scroll.
Yeah,
that will roll on this floor right here. So please believe me.
So we'll be praying for her. No, not really. So I want to start just by talking about how we met, how our relationship got started was really through the ARC process. We have a shared friend, Michael Smith in Delaware. Who's another just phenomenal guy with a huge heart to give and serve people. It's True Life Church, I believe. Yeah. And he called me and he says, man, I got this really great friend of mine that wants to relaunch a church. I was like, cool, we don't do relaunches. And and he's like, man, you're going to want to make an exception for this guy. Wow. And so we talked, and Marc, I was just like, gosh, if we ever made an exception for someone, I want this to be it. But I told you, I was like, hey, we don't do relaunches. Yeah. And then you told me you shared some things with me, and we can edit this out if you feel like it's too vulnerable. You're like, hey, he's like, listen, I didn't know as a person of color, coming to ARC, there was a place for me. Yeah. And he's like, I'm starting to see that there is. And that meant so much to me to hear you, share that, and the fact that you felt like, you could. Yeah. And so, I talked to, our people about it, and eventually you got a hold of the man who can make a change for you, Pastor Dino.
Well, here's what you actually don't remember is that I was actually in the office meeting with Marc Cleary when Michael called, and you came and ran into the office and was like, are you Marc Poland? So that's kind of how it started. So, and then when I, fast forward, and I'll circle back, but I think it was when I heard you and Amy speaking at the intensive is when I really, realized. I said, hey, I really want to be in relationship with this guy, this family. They're just incredible. So, so that is, what started the journey. But for me, you're right. we actually planted a church in 2016 in the inner city of Philadelphia. And when I was going through that process, someone had mentioned to take a look at ARC. And when I look, all I did was look on the website, and I just didn't see anyone that looked like me. So I was just like, I'm not going to fit in, like, forget it. And I moved on, and I actually went and decided to take my experience in business and leverage that with the relationships that I had, and then started, to plan a church in September of 2016. And sometimes when you experience failure, it helps you to, look at things a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so now before, when I looked at the faces, now I looked at the data, and then I saw that that ARC had such a success rate in planting churches. Now I'm struggling in Philadelphia after 3 years. And now I'm like, you know what? I don't care what faces are on there. I know that we have a 90+% rate of launching successful churches. I'm like, listen, I just need to get in. And so,
Yeah.
And you're right. At the time, we didn't relaunch churches, and, you guys making an exception for me. It was kind of one of those things. May want to edit this out. It's kind of one of those things where it was like, hey, we're going to do this for you, but don't tell anybody, because it was one of those things like, hey, if it doesn't work, you've never been here. One of those things. So, and if it works, we'll get all the credit, which I was totally fine with. So I just wanted to get in. I just wanted
I remember talking to you before your intensive. I was like, okay, you're going to be sitting at a table. We got you the best coach, Joe Adams, and detailed oriented. I could tell you were the same way. And I was like, do not tell anyone at your table that you're relaunching. Okay. Just be like, our new church.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was a great opportunity for us and for my wife to really, I think for us, especially from where we came from, it was great to be around people that believed in us. It was great to have these relationships. It was great, to just, again, be in a position where, you had the resources and the training that could really help you be successful. I think that was, what we were missing from where we came from.
So when you were coming through the process at first, when you're making those first few phone calls and you're being told no, what made you keep going?
Because I just believed in my heart that this was the thing for us to do. And I was just not going to take no from people who really couldn't, weren't the really key big decision makers. Mm-hmm. That's just something that I've just learned from being in corporate America. It's just like, unless the top guy tells me no, I'm going to just keep going, because it's when you just have something in your heart that that God, has, put you together with, like, you just don't take no. And I just kept going until somebody said yes. So I bribed a lot of people along the way. So, but no, I just joke.
No, bribe them with kindness. So, I think that's an important thing for people to hear, is that you kept going when you were told no, but it really was the right thing for you to keep going. Yeah. And the proof is in the pudding. Yeah. I mean, it's been a great experience for all of everyone involved with you. So how would you tell someone to discern when people are telling them no, and it really is, they're not listening to the people around them, right, giving them good advice, versus people around them telling them no and they need to keep going? Like, how can someone discern the difference between those two things?
Yeah, I think the key has to do with, at least for us, it was what was in our heart. It had to do with more a spiritual condition of our heart, meaning that when we stepped into the relationships, when we started going to the environments, for me, I was always searching, and I was always trying to find, how come I didn't, fit in? Like, why was I never at peace in the other environments that I was in? And when I first got into these environments, it was like a sense that this is the place where I belong. And so because I knew that and I had confidence in that, I just wasn't going to take no for an answer. But it wasn't because a mystical, or practical thing. It was just, I knew for a fact that this is where I was supposed to be. And even if I was willing, even if someone told me no, that I was still going to come, I was still going to show up. I was just going to wear somebody out until they said yes, hey, we're just going to invite this guy in. So regardless of whether someone said no or not, I was just going to be here, and I was just going to show up every single opportunity. until there was space
You know, looking on the outside in, I could tell you what I think the difference is that your ego was not involved.
No.
And it's so easy to tell when someone's ego is involved, because you have the characteristics I think have caused you to be successful is you're both persistent and you're teachable. And, you know, I work with a lot of church planners, and like, there's some people who are persistent, and that same persistence keeps them from being teachable. And then I have people who are teachable, but that same, you know, teachability really is a sign that they're not driven to really try things on their own. And so they ask a lot of questions, but they're not really asking great questions. They're just asking a bunch of questions because they want someone to tell them what to do.
Yeah, but I think I have a different perspective because I've had, and people hate when I say this, but failure has a way of humbling you and making you teachable. And so our first iteration of our church plan for me was a failure. And we worked so hard. And it was just in that moment where I realized that, man, it like we must be doing something wrong. It took us 3 years to get the church, you know, over 100. When I say 100, I'm not talking 175. I'm mean like 105. Like, you know,
101.
right? Exactly.
Exactly.
So it took 3 years, and so we had so much failure, so much pain, so much heartache that, you know what, I'm like, you know, I've got to, you know, find people that are doing it right, and I have to listen to them. And so here's the thing, here's the lesson that I've learned is that when I first began my sales career, there was a guy, I'll never forget it, and his name was Ian Bianchi. All right. So there's two things about this story real quickly is that number one, we had too many people in the office, and we had to share a desk. And so the first thing that he says, hey, whoever gets here first gets to use the desk because we had to share a desk. So let me tell you something. I was the guy that was turning the lights on in the office. I was like, this guy's never going to beat me to the office. And so that speaks to the determination and perseverance. But then he identified these 3 guys that were the top sellers in our organization. Now, his perspective was, man, these guys don't do anything. They, you know, they've got these big accounts or whatever. And so as soon as he left the office, I went and ran out into the hallway to the guy Jeff Cooney, who was one of the top sales reps, and this guy, Mark Hoffner. And I said to those guys, hey, listen, I'm new in this industry. I have no idea what I'm doing. Would you please take me under your wing? And they mentored me, and I ultimately, over a period of time, became one of the top sales reps. So in this process, when you know, part of ARC, you know, being part of ARC, God reminded me of that process, and He said, "I want you to do the same thing again. I want you to find the people who are doing it the best, and I want you to sit down, and I want you to learn everything you can from them." And so, that's what really helped me, you know, through this process.
Yeah, I've seen that same pattern in my life where what got me through one season was really preparing me for success in the next season.
Absolutely.
Over and over and over again, especially, you know, in my book, what I was experiencing, what I wrote about was the experience of, you know, these horribly painful lessons that I was learning that was really preparing me to be a better pastor, a better leader. And of course, I have to segue back to my book at some point in this conversation, but you know, but I identify completely with that. And I think that's something good for, you know, if you're a young person listening to this podcast, or anyone really, you know, take note of what you're having to go through right now. Because I believe in every difficult situation, God wants to do 2 things. He wants to make us more like Him and bring us closer to Him. And then the byproduct of that is we often learn a lesson in those difficult seasons that are going to bring us success in the thriving seasons. You know, so let's move on your timeline with ARC. So you come through the process. We all love you. We all secretly wanted to hire you. We're like, I wish he wasn't planting a church so we could hire him. And then you realized that you needed to wait. So you need to plant this church. You know, you need to get going. Then we're like, hey, you realize yourself really, hey, I need to push this thing back 6 months. What was that like?
It was again part of, you know, my determination and persistence. I was like, we got to get this thing going. We're gonna go and get this thing launched, and just having conversations with my wife. And she's like, you know, because we came in May, we were gonna relaunch in September. And I kept hearing her, but I was like, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, we're gonna do this thing anyway. And then the milestones, when we started looking at the milestones and looking at the timeline, and I'm like, man, you know, like we had the information in front of us. And I was like, dude, this is not going to work. And so we pushed it back 6 weeks. And actually the relief that our team had and that my wife had was like, man, because they, love us, they were going to go through it anyway. But I was just grateful that we saw the information. I started listening to people. I talked to you, and then when we pushed the timeline back, it was a relief to our team. It was a relief to us because it didn't feel like we had a gun to our head, and it ended up working out really well.
You said 6 weeks, but it was 6 months.
6 months. Yeah. So we pushed it back from September to 2020.
And so you pushed it back right into global pandemic. So kind of just talk us through the emotions and reality, because I think, if I could promote the podcast, what I would say is here's a church planner that started his church and then 2 weeks later shut it down because of COVID. Yeah. So, and you kept going somehow. So bring us through that. I kind of spoiled there was a spoiler alert, gave away the hook there, but you launched your church and you're excited. How many did you have on the first day? And what were you feeling? Talk us through those couple of weeks.
So here's the truth of it all is that, first of all, I don't watch the news, and whether you disagree or agree, I don't watch the news, so I never even knew about a pandemic. My head was down. I was focused on launching.
I don't watch the news either, but I do follow college sports very closely. Well, and when they were talking about canceling the SEC basketball tournament and the March Madness, I was like, for a cold? I was like,
yeah. So
I guys play. I want to watch the basketball.
So and during that time, I was fasting, so I wasn't watching sports. So I didn't know any of this was happening. And we launched on March 1st, 2020. We had 450 people.
Now, how did that feel after, you started in 2016, you waited 4 years, and then you thought you were going to launch, you'd push it back another 6 months, you people telling, like me, and you push through and like, man, you're in that moment and you're in a great location too. Tell them where you're.
Yeah, we're in Lower Merion High School, high school that Kobe Bryant attended. And that is a whole nother story. But for us, I had successfully grew our church back down to 75 people. I told everybody that they were on the launch team and we're going to go through this process and relaunch the church. And so I tried so hard to because I believe, based on my experience, where I grew up, how God is, I thought God was going to uniquely utilize my experiences to lead a diverse church. But the first iteration of it, I listened to everyone. Everyone said, hey, you've got to have, people have to see themselves on the stage. So I had the UN on the stage, as our musicians, but everyone in our seats were African-American. And so at this point, I was just like, forget it. This doesn't work. I'm going to just go with what I have. Yeah. The United Nations. So this time when we launched, we had 450 people in attendance, and it was the most diverse environment that I had ever been in. And what was interesting is that before we started service, people were in the hallway waiting to get into the auditorium, and my wife comes into the green room and she goes, Mark, you won't believe how many people are out here in the auditorium, and how many different people, like, it was white people, black people, it was Asian people. And I was like, are you serious? And so I ran out to go peek in the lobby, and I just started sobbing and crying. I couldn't even get myself together because I was like, oh my gosh. And so I learned even something about that. If you're going to lead a diverse church, you have to be in a community where it's even possible. So, but that's a whole nother story. So we launched 450 people.
Because you got pushback. You were kind of seen as a traitor.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. I mean, and listen, people were asking me, hey, are you trying to get more white people in your church? And I was like, yes, because because stereotypically, with African Americans, it's like, hey, we're always together. And I was like, hey, all the black angels are not going to be in heaven together. So I'm trying to prepare you. So we got a lot of that. We got a lot of pushback from the music that we were singing, and that's a whole nother story, because I'm a very analytical guy. And again, you may want to edit this out. And so people were saying, hey, how come we don't sing music like, other kind of music? I was like, what kind of music? And they would say Tasha Cobbs. They're like, Tasha Cobbs, well, give me a song. They would say Break Every Chain. I was like, well, Break Every Chain was written by a white guy, right? And it was like, so it was about preferences. And we were just saying, listen, we want to reach unchurched people, and we're going to do everything that we can to reach unchurched people. My favorite song is Paul Morton, what's the song? I'm Still Standing. I said, but we'll never play that in church.
Yeah.
So, but long story short, 47 people gave their lives to Christ. It was one of the greatest days that I've experienced, as a pastor. And
would you say that was has that been the mountaintop ministry moment?
That has probably been a mountaintop ministry moment for us in this season. And so next week, man, it was great. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. God is really
How many people
doing
came
something.
back?
Well, the next week was daylight savings time. That's the only thing that I didn't listen to you about.
Yeah, don't
so
launch the week before daylight
oh my
savings. Tell
gosh. So
people
the
that all
next
the
week
time.
we had 200 people, but we felt the momentum. We felt the community. We were getting phone calls. So I felt like we were going to actually go back up the following week. And then on Tuesday, March the 10th, is when we got the email from the school saying that we're not letting anyone outside of the school community come back into the building. And so during that time, again, if I'm not careful, my determination, persistence, I was like, okay, we're going to find another place to meet. Now, at this time, my team, they're starting to text me, hey, by the way, did you know that they shut down the NBA? And I'm like, are you full of faith or are you full of fear? Like, we're going to meet somewhere. And then on Thursday is when Governor Wolf, the governor of Pennsylvania, just basically shut down the entire state. And so,
yeah, I was on the phone with you while you were looking. I think you were looking at like a fitness facility.
we were looking at a synagogue. We were looking at a music hall. Any place that was open, we were going to try and find it. When he shut it down, truthfully, I laid in bed for 2 days because I was depressed.
I mean, that's quite a drop. I mean, that's like a Wile E. Coyote moment where he's running after the Roadrunner and falls off the cliff.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly
and he keeps falling. You think he's going to hit, but he keeps falling.
Yeah.
That was quite a emotional drop.
Yeah. So, and I just started asking God, like, why would you have us shut down this other church? Why would you have these people believe in us, to trust us to do this? Why would you have us raise all this money? Why would you have us spend all this money for this to happen? And I just, my wife was like, you're depressed. I was like, no, I'm not. But for 2 days, I didn't get out of the bed, man. And then I heard a word from God in my spirit, and he just said, I called you to pastor people, not a building. And he said, so pastor the people that you have. And immediately I got up and I was like, okay, we're going to pivot. We're going to go online and we're going to do everything that we can to continue pastoring this church. So but that was our journey, man. It was tough for a moment there, but then after that, I think I was fine. But it's like no one's ever pastored in a situation like this. You've got you had the political issues, you have the racial issues, then you had this pandemic. It was a tough.
Yeah, I mean, so not only did you only have 2 weeks, but then you went right into you were in an election cycle.
Yeah.
That was one of the in recent years. I think people forget that politics have been toxic for hundreds of years.
For sure.
And but in recent years, one of the most toxic political election years, and then racial injustice. You're trying to become more diverse in a time where this stuff's coming to the surface, and just in a world where things were changing so much. It was just a tough time to do that. But in your journal, you wrote something in January that I think is important about what you wanted, how you wanted God to use you.
Yeah, I think
you told me this before, so I'm bringing it up. You're looking at me like, what is this guy? How does he know it's in my journal?
I hope this is what you're talking about, but I just remember I told my wife and I just said, if we ever survive this church planning journey, that we want to spend the rest of our lives doing for others what we want to done for them. I hope that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think the opportunity to be a part of ARC really satisfies the dream that we had in our heart, that wherever we can do, we just want to help pastors and make sure that they don't make some of the same mistakes that we've made. So help them to avoid them and really help them to create these life-giving churches.
Which is what happened. I mean, honestly, we wish that we could have hired you, but we're like, well, first of all, we need to see if he knows what he's doing, and he's got to actually launch a church. Secondly, if he does know what he's doing, he's not going to want to work for us because his church is going to be going well. And then there's opportunity for you to come and really an answer to that prayer in that journal. And I think about, all the people that you're coaching and helping. The last intensive when you spoke on fundraising, like, why did I have to go through all this fundraising? And the response was people like, hey, we've never heard anything so practical that we can actually put our hands around and do.
But that's really what's Like if I showed you my journal now, it'd say I wanted to be a part of ARC, be a part of the Attentive, and the two things I wanted to help pastors create clear vision, and I want to help them raise money. Because when I started going through the process of trying to raise money, like no one, like, especially as an African American, they were like, well, we never did this before. And I don't know what to tell you. There were people that said, well, what if you don't get the money? And I was like, well, we have to get the money. If not, it's over. So it like I just and God just reminded me of my past experiences. Hey man, I don't waste anything. Utilize these experiences, and we raised over 350,000 in 5 months. So
which is ridiculous,
crazy.
And what's, and I think just how God works. I think sometimes we get our feelings hurt because God doesn't take our ego into consideration when he's marking out our training and his plan for our life. But you taught on that session on fundraising, and you weren't even the first choice. The person making the schedule was a real idiot and had scheduled somebody else. That person was me.
This is my TD Jakes moment.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That person was me, by the way. And I scheduled someone to speak, and it is Brandon Cormier. Brandon's like, dude, he's like, I can't talk about fundraising. He's like, we had so many supernatural things happen for us. He's like, I would just tell them to pray for something supernatural to happen. And I was like, all right. I was like, I think I got someone that can cover it. So you can talk about something else. And we moved Brandon to something he was more, qualified for. And, you just really knocked it out of the park. But now you guys are about to be back in person, back in Lower Merion High School, which is, it was already a landmark, but now it's like major landmark. And so looking back over this journey, there's still a long road ahead. What were some things that maybe you look back and say, I wish I'd have done things differently? I know sometimes COVID can cause me to look at a lot of things differently and say, I need to make some changes.
Yeah. I think the one big regret that I've had, just being, totally honest, is that I borrowed too much time away from my family. And I remember looking at the process of planning a church, and I said, this is only going to take 3 years, and my family will be okay. And so I put everything I had into launching and building a church, and I gave them what I had left. And what I had left just wasn't enough. I remember my wife, saying, hey, when are we going to spend time together? When are we going to spend time together? And I just actually thought she was just complaining. And but what I started seeing, because at that time my son was 12, and from 12 to the age of 15 is when he began to exhibit some behaviors that I was just kind of like, hey man, that's not what we value. And so I just thought my family coming to church with me all the time, being a part of the church planning process, was enough for them in terms of their spiritual formation. And I was wrong. And so that's my biggest regret. I actually apologized to my family recently for doing that. I love what I do. I love working. I love being involved in the church. But I did it by sacrificing my family. And the one thing that I'm sure of is that God's going to ask me, what did you do with the family that I gave you? And I don't know that my answer of saying I was building a church is going to be the right one. God. And so that's the one regret that I really have. And
man, that is so good. Yeah. I mean, that really hits deep, cuts deep. And I think I heard someone say one time that Jesus already laid down his life for the bride. You don't have to do that for him. He's already done it. Yeah. And, the idea that we're going to be just as accountable for our families as we are for our ministries, just as accountable. Yeah. What'd you do with your family? What'd you do with your ministry? It's not going to be, just your ministry. Right. And when you think about it, like, hey, this 50% of it, but I'm giving it 10% of my, looking at it through an eternal lens, it changes things.
Yeah. And I think, and so for me, and I don't know any other way to say this without people being, especially if they've been affected by it negatively, but COVID in hindsight was the best thing that happened to me, because that is the only reason why I stopped. That is, I was forced to stop, and it caused me to reevaluate the things that were most important. So from March 15th through August the 15th, all we had was each other, my family. And so there's two things that happened. Number one, I was able to spend time with my son. We were able to, establish a rhythm for devotion with my family, with my girls and my wife. And then secondly, I was able to establish a routine that would help me be consistent with my devotion to God, my commitment to work, and then my commitment to my family. So prove it was the best thing that has ever happened to me in my life. And again, I obviously I empathize with those who have been affected negatively by it. But if it wasn't for COVID, I would have never stopped.
No, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, I've heard people say, a sickness has been the best thing that's happened to them because it caused them to realize, how precious life is, or even being fired from a job. And I think for our family, we experienced the exact same thing. The time that I got with my kids, I'm like, oh my goodness. And then the time with Amy, we were all forced into making our family a priority again. And I mentioned two things, and I felt the Holy Spirit kind of give me a check. I said 50% family, 50% ministry. It's not really true, because you mentioned it. We're going to be held accountable for our relationship with God, and that's really the primary thing. And is our relationship with God, and it all starts there. It starts with love relationship with Jesus, and if we don't have that, that other stuff's not going to fall into place. And when we do that first, and then family, and then ministry, really ministry is not even, I don't even think it's in the top 3 priorities. I think the lordship of Jesus Christ is number 1. Your family is number 2. Your personal witness. I think a lot of pastors have big churches where they have a terrible personal witness. Your personal witness would be number 3. And, your ministry might be number 4, I think, in priority wise. And if you live that right, what's going to happen is your ministry is going to thrive. But I think so many people are willing to give much more than they should to see results in ministry, because they feel like it's something good, but really they're not doing it for ministry. It's their own ego. I was so guilty of that. And I was willing to give more than I should for the ministry results, because it gets instant validation. When you have ministry results, it gets instant validation. You don't get instant validation for relationship with God, personal witness, or family.
Exactly.
But my wife's dad, passed away in 2014, and he was a minister, he was a pastor, but his last years of his life, he wasn't a pastor. And so he didn't have like this great ministry following. But at his funeral, the friends that he had made were all there through ministry, and his family members were there. And my brother-in-law got up and gave, basically he eulogized his father. And I thought, man, that is what true success is. I want my family, my wife, and my kids to miss me when I'm gone, and I want friends to miss me because I live like Jesus in front of them. And Mark, I think you're doing that. And I know everything's not as it should be in the world right now, but I think you sharing that today is going to be a huge help to a lot of people, your church planning journey. And, you say the best for last. I mean, the part about your family is the most important thing. And so thank you for being on this podcast with me.
Man, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this, man. And I'm just so grateful that I didn't cry.
Dude, I was like, man, there's going to be some emotional parts there at the end.
I'm like, oh, man. But no, this is great. And like I said, I think without, knowing that you were even doing this, I just think this is just another way for us to, my wife and I, to kind of live out, our dream is just to be a blessing and, again, do for others what we want it done for us. So however it can happen.
How can people be in touch with you and stay connected?
Man, you can reach me on Instagram.
What's your Instagram handle?
Marc, M-A-R-C, Poland, like the spring water, Poland. Or shoot me an email at info at the Discover Church, thediscoverchurch.com.
Yeah. So I've already given this to you, but you're going to get a Believe Again book, Believe Again shirt, Believe Again hat. And my good friend, Aaron Vogel, said that he was going to sponsor this podcast. And so what he has is he's a restaurant owner, but also they started a coffee company called Cool Kids Coffee. And what they do is they give the profits from their coffee go to help foster kids find a home in New Orleans.
That's awesome.
And so it's all small batch, roasted coffee. I've been to the roastery and seen it. It's first class. It's as good as it gets.
Wow.
And so we're going to send you a bag of coffee too.
Man,
so
let's go. Let's do it.
All right, man. All right,
man.
All right, dude.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Love you, bro. See ya. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Believe Again podcast. I want to thank my guest, Marc Poland. I also mentioned Cool Kids Coffee, our sponsor for this podcast. Thank you to them. Also want to thank our other sponsor, Yellow Box. If you're a church planner or pastor and you're looking for creative solutions for your church, marketing, branding, help, or you just want to outsource and hire a creative team to come in and help your church, Yellow Box has some great solutions. You can find them at yellowbox.co. And also my book, Believe Again, is available on Amazon. Just search Believe Again, Finding Faith After Losing Religion. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.